So great. So that's push, which adds one or more things to the end of the array, and then dot pop is kind of like the sibling function, if you will. Dot pop removes one element from the end of the array. Dot pop always removes the last element and only one element. So if you want to remove like three things, like the last three things, then you want to call dot pop like 3 times, because dot pop by default is only able to remove one thing at a time. And so if you go back to our kind of 3-step process here, what it does, it removes the last element in the array. Does it change the original array? Absolutely, because it takes away the last element in the array. And what does it return? It returns back the thing that it just took off. So that way, if you call, so in that case, we have this names array, and I store names.pop. I notice how I have this open and close parentheses. It means I'm invoking the function. If I call names.pop and I capture the return value in this variable called Jefferson, when console log out names, we'll see my array is now shortened because I've taken away the last thing. And if I console log out Jefferson, we'll see I get Thomas, which stores the last thing that was actually just removed. Right. So push returns back the new length of the array. Dot pop returns back the thing that just got taken out. And then you'll see the pattern here. We then have a method called shift, which works almost exactly like pop, except rather than removing the last element, it removes the first element. So and it's called shift because if you think about, if I have a list, if I have 10 people in line and I take away the first person in line, everyone else's position kind of shifts over one, right? And so that's what we call a shift. And once again, shift can only remove one element. And what it does is it removes the first element. Does it change the original array? Absolutely. We're taking away elements here. And then what does it return? It returns back the thing that just got taken away. So almost identical to pop, except it's the first element instead of the last one. And then if you're keeping track, then obviously the fourth thing we're talking about here is unshift, which is probably not the best named thing, or maybe it is the best named thing because this is super clear what it does, right? It works just like push, except instead of adding things to the end of the array, we're now adding things to the beginning of the array, and so what it does, it adds one or more things to the beginning of the array. Does it affect the original array? Absolutely, because we're adding things to the array. And then what does it return? Just like push, it returns back the new length of the array. How many things are in your array now after it finishes adding things to the beginning of the array? Very good? Yes?
So pop and shift, you can only do one thing, but unshift, you can do multiple things.
Yep, unshift and push, you can add multiple things. Okay, the next method we're talking about, so now we're kind of out of the realm of adding and removing things from the beginning to the end. The next method we're talking about is the index of method. Index of method, if you use it, it also exists for strings. So this is one of those things that, this is somewhat shared, I guess. Basically, index of is just a search function. If I have an array, and I do array, in this case, names.index of, and I pass in an element, it will actually go through the array and help and try to look for that element. It only looks for an exact match. So if you have a string, it has to be same exact character, right? Like capitalization, like spacing, everything matters, right? It has to be the same exact match. And the way it looks for that match is it will go through the array. It will go from left to right, and it will give you back the index of the very first match it finds. Okay. So if I have an array that has 3 of the same things and I look for it, index of will only let you know what the first one is going from left to right. It won't tell you how many times I found it. It'll just say I found it at least once. Here's the first match that I found. And then, very conveniently, if it doesn't find a match, it will return back -1, right? -1 can't be an index. Every other number 0 or above can be a positive index. -1 cannot be an index. So whenever you use it and you get back a -1, it means there was no match in this array. Any questions? Very handy. And then the last one, I think, is a slice method. Slice basically is this one. I didn't do that thing where it's like the 3 components of it, right? So what does it do? It searches for the element. Does it change the original array? It does not, because it only searches for it. It just looks through it, right? And what does it return? It returns back the index if it finds it, or it returns back -1 if it doesn't find anything. Yeah. Okay, and then lastly, we have our slice method. Slice basically is a way to copy an array. We'll talk a lot more about copying over the next couple weeks. So take everything what I say now as kind of like at face value. Just know that there is more complexity, and we're going to kind of let you know what that is once we get there. But for now, at least, think of it as just copying an array. The way that the slice method works is it takes in well, we'll say 2 arguments, and what it does is the first argument that you give it, it has to be a number, and it has to be an index position. And basically says, hey, start copying my array at this index, including that number. And so what that means is, in this case, when I do names.slice, and my first argument 1 says, okay, start at index 1, 0, 1. So I'm at John, and it says, basically, include John in whatever it is that you're copying, okay? The second argument tells me what index to stop at, but it doesn't include this index. So in this case, when I say start at 1, John, stop at index 2, so Thomas, but don't include Thomas. This basically means just create a copy of this array with just this John element. And in fact, when I print it out, that's what I see. And then if we do our if we do our thing, sorry, 1 second. Yep. If we do our thing about the 3 different aspects of it, what does it do? It copies it copies at least part of an array. Does it change the original array? No, it copies it. So therefore, we don't ever modify the original array. So it's considered a very safe function to use. And what does it return? It returns back the new array that is copied. Okay. And then, as a nice shorthand, if I call slice and I don't put any arguments in there, by default, that just means copy the entire array for me. Okay. So on line 6 there, when we say names copy, if you do names.slice, we don't put in any arguments. It basically says, give me the entire copy of names. And the point here, the point here is to say that, as imagine how a copy works, right? If I have a piece of paper and I Xerox it, I can write on a new piece of paper. It doesn't affect the original piece of paper, right? Same idea here. I create my new copy, which I call names copy. I change the second element. I add some extra things into it. When I print out names and when I print out names copy, we'll see that names has not changed, whereas names copy has changed, right? So this is probably the main reason why we ever use slice, is because we want to edit the array, but we don't want to edit like the master, the original copy. We want to edit, kind of our own sandbox version. Oh, I lied to you. There's more. Includes. The includes method. The includes method is almost like a dumber version of the index of method. It also does a search, except it doesn't tell you like where it is. It just returns back true or false. True if it exists, and false if it doesn't exist. So it's like a dumb search function. And then the other 3 things for the includes function. What does it do? It searches for the element that you give it in the array. Does it modify the original array? It does not, because it's doing a plain search. And what does it return? True if found, false if not found. Okay, and this is the last one, the reverse method. The reverse method doesn't take any arguments, because you just reverse, as the name indicates, you're just reversing the array. And notice how, because it doesn't, notice how what it does is you call it on the original array and it actually reverses the original array in place. So what does it do? It reverses the array. Does it change the original array? Absolutely. Okay. It doesn't create a new array that's reversed. It reverses the actual original copy of the array. What does it return? I actually don't know, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's probably undefined. My guess is. Actually, let's find out right now. But if I call x.reverse, okay, that wasn't very helpful. Oh, I guess it also returns the original array. Okay, I guess it also returns the original array too, but it doesn't, like, it's not returning. Actually, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm telling you the right thing here. Okay, yeah, it returns the original array too. So in most cases, like in terms of like how you use it, normally you don't care about the return value for the reverse, right? You call .reverse on an array to reverse it kind of in place, and then you use that array going forward. So you don't really care about the return value, although I guess they do give it back to you in that instance. And I think that should be it. Yep, that's it for arrays. Any questions?
What was splice?
Splice is tomorrow.
Okay.
And so what splice does is, if you notice, so far we've told you how to kind of take away and add things in the beginning and the end of the array. Splice is to kind of do it in the middle, but it's a tomorrow thing. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Question about the slice. You can pass in 2 arguments, but if you only pass in 1, does it just start copying the array as of that index up until the end?
Yep. Go ahead. Yep. Exactly. That's what it does. If you pass in only one number, it just starts at that in the position and assumes you want to go till the end. Is there a question in the back too?
Yeah. How many arguments can slice take?
Great question. And if you have questions like that, let's look it up. Yeah. And I'm kind of being serious here, right? Like programming is definitely not like it's definitely not a memorization game. There's just too much changing, honestly, for you to like memorize everything. Like the documentation and usually is very, very good. So it looks like, okay, so it looks like a slice caps out at 2 arguments. Whereas something like push, for example, has unlimited arguments, right? Because you can keep adding as many things as you want to the end of it. So slice only takes in 2 things. The way to read this is things in brackets, and this is pure for documentation. This has nothing to do with actual JavaScript. Things in brackets usually means optional. So with slice, remember how like if you pass in nothing, it means copy the whole array. And the way to interpret this is the begin is in brackets, which means I could give it a begin value. And then notice how the end value is in another set of brackets, which means I could also give it an end value, but I could give it neither of these 2 things and the functions would still work. Or it would still do something. And then there was a question on this side, I think. Yes?
Is there like an actual term for these functions that do something or just look at something? Like the difference between
Not that I know of.
no? They're
Not
just
that,
all functions?
I mean, yeah, so they're called like array methods. I guess like if you want to call it like mutative, like you can say if it changes or not, but I don't think there's like I don't know of any direct terms for functions that change the array versus not. Any other questions? Yes.
I guess in terms of like properties versus methods or functions, I guess is there like a set distinction as far as when you need to declare another variable? I guess if you're going to be inheriting like a different, like something that's been mutated in some way in the original, or I guess instead of like I know for like reassigning, you don't necessarily need to be declaring a new variable. I don't know, just based on how it was.
Do you have an example in mind? Yeah, I mean, so usually like properties and methods are things that like it's kind of like, you know, it's a thing about buying a new computer, right? Like it usually comes pre-installed with a bunch of programs. You feel free to add your own, edit the ones that already exist, remove the ones that already exist, do whatever you want to it. In this case, like these properties, like the .length property and like these array methods, these come kind of included for you. You have the option of overriding them or adding new ones if you want. But in general, in most cases, like you don't edit the ones that are kind of out of box because everyone kind of assumes that they are what they are. And so if you change like .length to be like, oh, the length -1, you're really making it hard for anyone coming after you to know how this code really works. Usually, but you're definitely more than free to add your own properties and methods if you want. That did not answer your question, I can tell.
I guess I meant like in terms of actually needing to go through and like declare different variables that you're going through and like saying let X and then later on Y.
So declaring variables is only useful for one thing, which is to say that if I want to capture a return value that I want to use later on, I have to store it somewhere. If I don't capture a return value, then I lose it forever, right? And so in this case, like just in this code, right, here I want to create an empty array, which I can create without this let X, but then I can't ever refer to it ever again without storing it in X, right? So that's why I had this let X here. X.push, I don't need to store anything because I don't care about the length that push is going to give back to me. So I just toss it out, right? I can just do X.push and it'll add these things to my X array. I say let Y equals X out reverse, and that was because I was trying to figure out what X returned, right? And so that's why I say, well, if I want to take a look at the return value, like specifically, I need to store it somewhere so I can look at it, right? So that's why I have to let Y equals X reverse here. And then line 6, this was just like a test for me to see if these were indeed the same original arrays, and they were. Yes?
So if you wanted to keep X.push for something else, you could name it like let Z equal X.push, and then Z would be that new array.
It would be more like let Z equals X, and then you would do if you do Z equals X, then you're basically creating two variables that refer to the same exact array.
No, so it would be sort of let X.push. So you have at the top X equals the empty array.
Yep.
And then at the beginning of line 3, say Z equals X.push. And then, so now Z is the new array, or no?
Well, what is line 3 saying? What are we setting Z equal to?
12 David Dome.
Nope.
No?
Nope. Remember, when do we usually create variables?
When you want to use them for something else. So
When we want to capture what?
the array.
No, we want to capture the return
The
value.
return value, yeah.
Right, and so what does X.push return?
12. The addition of those two.
The new array.
What
Oh,
does
the numbers.
what does that push return?
The
Da-da.
numbers, that's right.
Or is it? There you go. What does X return? Or what does that push return? X.push returns back the new length of the array.
The length, okay.
Right. So if I go now and I just do a console log Z, or if I just comment out these things and I do a console.log out Z, I am going to get back 3 because that's the new length of the array. Right. So this is why I'm really stressing here like the return value, and this is going to kind of bite you really hard if you don't really kind of focus on this, is that don't assume the return value is going to be what it is. Make sure you know exactly what the return value is going to be, because if I want to get a reference to these 3 things, it's a very different process than me just assuming that that push gives you back everything. It's no, that push gives you back something else, right? So feel free to always store it and print it out. But if there's the 2 hardest things I think for people who are starting off, one is understanding how return actually works, how a function passes things back and forth between each other, and then the other one is has to do with this idea that it's more do you understand the order in which the code actually is being run? And I'll just do another kind of FYI here. Console log is surprisingly not useful in the real world. It's useful for humans. It really has no impact on a computer. And so if there's one thing you want to take away from this is don't ever confuse a console log for a return value, right? The analogy I usually give for a console log versus a return is that if your boss asks you for an assignment, right, or your professor gives you a test and asks you to turn a paper in or something along those lines, right? The console log is you giving them an update, hey, I'm working really hard on this, or here's my progress. The return value is what you actually hand in. Okay, so if your function has a bunch of console logs but no return value, it's like saying you told your manager you gave them a bunch of status updates, but you didn't give them the final report. And so as far as the manager is concerned, you gave them nothing back. Okay, so don't ever confuse a console log for a return. Console logs are really great for humans to see what's going on. They don't mean much to a computer. Okay. Cool. Any questions on arrays? Any more questions on arrays before I take a quick detour into a for loop? Yes.
Just to double check, the return value of the shift method, it returns the first element, or?
Shift removes the first element, so it returns back whatever was just removed.
Okay. So the push method is the only, or as far as we reviewed today, the push method is the only method that returns an array length as opposed to
Unshift also returns the new array. Yep. And these are all on the documentation website if you ever forget it. Okay, Cool. Really quickly, you all did for loops like 2 days ago, right? Who here is like really comfortable with for loops? Okay, great. Well,
I would say really comfortable.
one person in the back said they were, so I'll just pick on them. Okay, so we have time. Yeah, it's like only 40. Okay, I'm gonna do like a quick thing, and this is just to hopefully make for loops a lot easier for you because when you talk about when you talk about objects and kind of more complex arrays, like knowing how a for loop actually works is incredibly important. Okay, so if I do like let x, so here, let foo equal, let's say 1. I'll do let x equal David. Sorry, this is gonna get very contrived very quickly. You know what? No, I'm gonna make this a number and make this a string. Okay. X dot David 6. Okay, and then x. And here is this foo plus plus, and then we do I need an array, don't I? Okay. Okay, and this is bar dot. Okay, I'm sorry. Bar dot push, and then this will be let's say x plus foo. Okay. All right. Who can tell me what this function is doing, or what this for loop is doing?
Would there be an incrementalization there with the third term?
Not necessarily. Yep. So who feels comfortable explaining to me what this for loop is doing right now? It's a for loop, and it makes use of only things that we've talked about in class. Yes.
Just I guess. I mean, I'm not sure, but.
Oh shoot! Sorry. Wait. Sorry. I'm so sorry. 1 second. This should be dot includes because we're not using objects anymore. Sorry. The last time I did this demo, we were using objects, so I was trying to memorize what we did there. But okay. Now, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so you're starting or does it include the previous code before? The one right above where you commented code out?
Sorry. Does it include what?
The code you.
No, it does. It doesn't include anything before this. All that are just comments. So it starts on line 8 and goes until line 14.
The for loop starts at the variable x is assigned to David.
Okay.
Then you put the string David 6 inside the array bar.
Okay.
And you return x.
And I return what?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I put the string Davis 6 inside bar. Okay, and then
Then you return x.
word. Okay.
Is, David.
Okay.
Increment 4 by 1.
Yep.
And you push it to the. You end up like David plus. David 6 plus 1.
Yeah. Okay. More guesses. Well, actually, first of all, let's just do something really simple here. How many times is this loop gonna run?
Forever. To the end of the array.
What array?
It's gonna keep looping until it finds David 6 and 5.
Okay. So let's do this like a numerical. Okay. Who thinks this will run? How many times? Well, let's say will the body of this code run, right? Everything between these two square curly braces. Who thinks 0? Who thinks 1? 2. Who thinks 2? Who thinks 6? Okay. Who thinks more than 6? All right. I could just ask a half of you who didn't vote at all, like what you think, to be more precise here. Okay, but it sounds like majority think 6, a few think once, and then
I might think it's
7, so more than 6.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So the easiest way to test any code is to just run it, right? To kind of see what happens. At least in cases where there's no consequences. Okay. So if I just do console log here, and I'll say I ran. Okay. This means every time that this body runs, I should be able to see I ran print out once on my screen. Okay. And then in fact, I'll just also add a thing here that says I finished, so we know like, hey, this thing actually did finish. Cool. All right. So I run this code. What do I get? Yep, that's what you get. Right. So the answer was the body doesn't run a single time in this for loop. Okay. So the reason why I do this kind of very contrived example here is to show you that the way a for loop is set up, there's nothing that ties a for loop to a number or an array. Even though that's how we most commonly use it. We think, oh, great, let I equal 0, we have an index, and then we use it through the array, right? But there's nothing that ties a for loop to an array. It just happens to be the most common use case for the for loop. The other thing I'll say there is that whenever we use a for loop to iterate through an array, when we do let I equal 0, that I is just a number. It's literally a random number that we created kind of from our imaginations, right? We start at I equals 0 because that happens to be the first index, right? There's nothing that ties that number to any array, really. Okay, so if I walk through this code here, and then I'll add this exclamation point here in front of bar, and now what this will do is this should now run 6 times, I believe. 5 times? Why 5? Oh, because I started at 1. Yep. Okay, cool. 5 times. What a for loop does is, if you remember like the way that the slides laid out, it was like there's an initializer, there's like a check, and then there's like an incrementer, right? Really, the way to think about like that whole process is, yes, that's how normally it works. But if I want to be kind of very precise on how a for loop is actually working, right? Like step 1 is still my initializer in this case, which is let x equal David. Okay, that's my step 1, and this is I'll call it my initializer. Okay, the initializer only ever runs once for each for loop. Okay, so we can kind of be sure that once that runs, we're completely done with it. We won't ever need to revisit this ever again. Okay, the next step that actually runs is this middle area. And when I say middle, what it means is it's between the 2 semicolons. Okay, in this case, I'll call it like the check, right? And in this case, what it does is in the previous, let's copy paste this, probably easier. In the previous example, what the check was, the check is going to run that bar.includes and the string David6. Okay, and what the check's going to do is the check is JavaScript's going to evaluate this code. And remember we talked about coercion like either 2 days ago, I guess, for you, or last Thursday. What the check really is saying is, hey, I'm going to evaluate all of this code. It's going to give me back a value, and I'm going to convert that value to a Boolean, true or false. And the reason why I do that is because to a for loop, as far as a for loop is concerned, the only thing it really needs to know is, hey, do I need to run this code again? Right? Nothing else really matters. It just needs to know, do I need to run this code one more time? Okay? And so based on this check, if this check comes back as true, it means JavaScript says, great, let's run the for loop again. If it comes back as false, it just says, we're done. There's nothing else to run. Okay? And so in the example that I had before, right, basically we reached this point. And this point basically says, hey, this bar array that I created up above here, does David6 exist inside this bar array? And the answer is no, because it's an empty array. By definition, nothing exists in this array, right? So as soon as we hit this gives me back false. And as far as a for loop is concerned, it's done. There is no more next step. I've looped. I'm all done looping. And so that's why that body of the code runs 0 times. Okay. If I put an exclamation point now in front of this, which is a bang operator or the not operator, Now this basically says, hey, is Davis 6 not inside this bar array? And the answer is, yeah, it's not. It's an empty array. It doesn't have anything in it, right? So assuming this check returns true, we then go to the next stage of our for loop, which is not this third part. And I think this is the part that people don't really like thoroughly kind of understand as intuitively as they should, which is that as soon as this passes true, then we say, great, let's go to the body of our code and actually run our for loop, right? And so as soon as this comes back as true, we then go to the body of our for loop, and what this function now is doing is taking this foo variable, is incrementing it by 1, so our 1 becomes 2, and then we're adding this x plus foo into bar. Rather, we're adding this element into bar. So bar is an empty array. What's x plus foo? Right. X is always going to be the string David. At least, sorry, for now at least, X is a string David. Foo is a number, right? It was 1. I incremented now, so now foo is 2. What's David plus 2? David 2, right? This makes use of the string coercion that we learned Friday. Do you have class Friday?
Just this Friday.
Oh, to make it, okay, yeah. Yeah, so now we're pushing in this string called David2 into the array, right? I console log out, I ran, and at this point, I then hit the third part, right? The third portion of our for loop here. And so here I'll say run code body, okay? No, not that. Run code body. And then once I'm done doing this, then I'll go into my fourth part, and here's where before we called it the incrementer, but really like it's just code, right? We're just adding one extra step of code that we say always run this before we go to the next iteration of our loop. And what is that? And what is that code in this case? That code is just x. And what does it do? Absolutely nothing. And the point here is that that code doesn't need to do anything, right? There's nothing that ties that code to anything else. It's just execute this line of code. Cool? Right? So it doesn't do anything, but after we're done with our incrementer, now here's where like the actual looping happens, right? The for loop says, okay, great. I ran through one successful iteration of this for loop now. Let's see if we can do this one more time, right? And so because the initializer only runs once, we don't do this again. We then jump to the next bar.includes Davis6 again. Or in this case, because I put an exclamation point in front of it, it's like, does bar not include Davis6? And the answer for now is, it does not include Davis6, right? Like, so this is true. And so because this is true, we then do the loop of running our code body, right? And in this case, what does the code body do? The code body says, well, let's increment foo by one more. So now foo is 3. Let's see what David plus 3 is. It's the string David3. Let's add it to bar, right? So that's what the code body does. So here I'll say, adds David2, and then similarly down here, this will add David3. And once we finish doing that, we then go back to our incrementer and just run x again. What does x do? Nothing really. And you know what? I don't care, right? It doesn't matter to me. It's just a line of code. I need to put something there, so I just ran, almost a placeholder piece of code. And so this will keep running over and over and over again. And this is where this is like the loop part of the for loop, right? Normally when people first learn for loops and arrays, they think, oh, I'm just going through the array. But really, there's nothing that says you're going through the array, right? What you're doing is you're incrementing a number over and over again, and you're kind of hoping that that number is going to link you to an element in the array. And so because of that, this is kind of what's behind the scenes is happening at every instance. So we're going to add David 4, we're going to add David 5, and then lastly, we're going to add David 6. Okay? And so once this finishes running, the next time this function runs, it'll say, hey, does David 6 exist in this array? Or does David 6 not exist in this array? And then the answer will be false, because David 6 does exist in this array. And now at that point, my for loop finishes. Okay, so that's the life cycle of this particular for loop, right? And once again, so you have the Slack link to this, so feel free to take a look at it, right? But notice how this distills the for loop to its core essence, right? There's nothing with numbers. There's nothing with greater than or equal to. There's no incrementer here, but yet this is a completely valid for loop, because a for loop is not tied to a number. It's not tied to an array. So when you do today's workshop problem, really try to like make sure you understand how a for loop is working, like what's happening at each step, and not just kind of take it for granted that, oh well, like it's going to go through the elements for me and I don't even think more about it. Because if you think that way, eventually like there will come to a point where you're like, oh, like you need to understand for loop on a deeper level, and a lot of the things you kind of glossed over, like they'll kind of come out to haunt you. Okay, so this is kind of how a for loop is really working. If I want to do a traditional like array, if I just do something like like let I equals 0, I do I is less than array dot length, and then I plus plus, right? Now hopefully like this is a little bit more clear, kind of like why it fits in, right? Before, or rather, let me just go through here, and let's say here I just wanted, I don't know, console.log out array index I. Right. Now to put it in context of this again, the first thing we do is we initialize this random variable called I. We set it equal to 0 because it happens to make sense in our case. We check is I less than the array length, and then if it is, we then console log out array at position I, and then lastly we increment I by 1. Right. Notice how, as far as a for loop is concerned, it doesn't know that it's dealing with an array. It just knows, hey, you're asking me to take a number, compare it, and then add 1 to it over and over and over again. Right, so there's nothing that ties a for loop to a number or to an array explicitly. Sorry, there's a question in the back. Yeah.
So on line 14,
yep.
Just console logging out IRAN, can you replace it with bar?
Sure, totally. I'll put IRAN and I'll put bar after it. Because this is not real code. Sorry, I used the array variable that I didn't create. Oh, what do I do now? Oh, these are all not code. Okay. Okay. Cool. So that's at each iteration. You can kind of see how my array builds up, and then when I get to Davis 6 in there, it actually finally stops, because that's when the next check fails. Any more questions? Cool. Well, Godspeed on the workshop. I will.